another fine gentleman who has contributed greatly to similar thought leadership platforms over the years. I'd like all of us to welcome up here to the stage IDEG's Dr. Emmanuel Akwetey.
Mr. Chairman, you know I'm a very shy guy, and when I'm asked to be present in fora like this, I get nervous. So what I do is I observe all the protocols except to acknowledge His Excellency, the former President, Mr. John Mahama. Prof is my good friend, and so all protocols observed. I didn't know my dear friend and brother Kojo would be speaking before me, but I think he's laid a solid foundation that I'd like to build on. It's also because it's the Center for Democracy that he is part of, that also did the study that we've all looked in with the Westminster. In trying to think about funding parties for us at IDEG, we felt strongly that we ought to draw attention that we've just crossed over from the first 30 years of our democracy, probably the first in our independence history and colonial as well, and that the stability of the 30 years has also made us live through serious challenges that also challenges us to rethink, is this what we want? And as we looked at the topic, that the theme of this meeting, we brainstormed and said we need to find solutions to problems. It's not just to do the analysis. And what occurred to us was that in this 30 years we've had a long time to look at parties, to look at the state, to look at the private financiers, who are also become a focus of the criticism, that instead of supporting parties to become powerful development agents who will transform our economy and society, they put profit over the noble ideal of transforming economies and nations. Parties are nation builders, they are development agents, but it looks like their entrenchment in the activity of elections is often put at the doorsteps of the financiers. And in that, what you see sometimes is this gap. The financiers want money, they take over parties and control them, but it's also a fact that members of parties don't pay money much. We don't know their dues, their contributions. And the state, that 30 years ago wasn't actually interested, or the framers of the Constitution, in building strong parties in opposition, actually said parties can only contest parliamentary elections and presidential elections, and they stay out. So if you want to see the governance framework, you wouldn't see parties in local government, but you will see parties increasingly marginalized to the extent that we have two big parties, giants, who fight, alternating power. And yet, for governance, you do not only need to alternate power, you ought to find a way of working together to transform economies and societies. So having looked at what the situation is and having read the concept paper that we got, we thought that in the next 30 years, the challenge is, could we rebuild our parties into development agents? And there is data that shows, and Kojo referred to, the marginalization that the majority voters themselves complain of, women, youth. And they say this system is not working. In fact, all the arrangements made under the 1992 Constitution to ensure that women, youth, people with disability, chiefs, and so on would be represented in the local government system has failed. It hasn't worked. And we sincerely believe that if we do not look at the structures we created, the assumptions, and what has caused this failure, we may lose the next 30 years. And we tend to therefore have a different approach, which is that probably In the next 30 years, we want to see that our parties do not do just elections, but they really are building a nation and transforming our economy. And the people they have to do with are the youth. It's a leadership transition in progress. And the question is, do parties train leaders who would take over from them? I mean, I don't know how to put it, but I think if I take the leadership we have, the political leadership we have, who have lived through the next 30 years, probably we're all in the pension age. So where is the next generation of leaders who are coming to transform this? And on that note, it seems to us that it is indeed absolutely important that we conceptualize not those who finance the parties as, you know, the Sherlocks and who would want to take money and make money out of the people, because the existing regime allowed that. But rather, can we see a new concept of partnership where funders, the state, and members of party contribute to running the business of parties and nation building? And I think that calls for a different paradigm, which we need to consider carefully. We had a few examples to look at. We asked ourselves, if we're looking at the recent data of parties registering their members, especially the two parties, major parties, NDC and PP, they both say they have about 3.5 million members. In 2016, when we posed that question, many said they were around 4 million. I said, wow, 4 million. If every member can pay 10 cedis a month as a contribution to the party, and not just pay 10 cedis for the year, how much would each party earn in that year? And when we calculated it, it's quite a substantial amount. If translated, it's like 360 million cedis, which is approximately $29 million a year for if you put the parties together. That is substantial money. And yet, we see our party members are so poor that they cannot contribute in building the capital basis of the party. It is not true. Because we see how much is spent on campaigns. We see the treating, which is even against the regulations of party campaign, but it's done. And in the process too, we do not really adhere to the laws against the very things that undermine the integrity of the party, not only as an election machine, but a development law enforcement organization. So rebuilding the party and giving it that identity, a builder of a nation could bring youth and party financiers together, but youth, the young ones, could contribute to paying dues. And we need to look at how we could entice them or encourage them to do this, because the money that comes annually, if you put it together for 4 years, it's huge. We do not leave out the private financiers who, I think when you look at the concept paper and the way it was framed, they become anti-people and they are too greedy. But we think they should still contribute, but they should contribute within the philosophy and the ideology of the party, which they must subscribe to, rather than just making money. And we also think that the state cannot just free ride on parties not contributing to parties. They used to give them this vehicle that was made in Poland at the time, and some public speakers and so on. And then later on, they moved to say radio stations, GBC grant time for them to broadcast in elections. And then the issue was those in government get more time than those in opposition, and so on. But we've moved there. The majority of voters, we moved from there. The majority of voters we have, from our estimation, are well educated, much more than those of us in their generation in terms of the size of the population exposed to global trends. And the gadgets they have to engage are phenomenal. They are well informed globally, and they have youth they connect with, networking knowledge and so on and so forth. And it's a group that has to be looked at differently. What are the policies that NDC, MPP would put in place to nurture this youth? Whether we like it or not, they are the next generation of leaders. And with what will they come to public service? Will they come to want to enrich themselves immediately? Or will they come and say that on our leaders' thighs we stand to be led into what loving Ghana and building a strong country is? This is an important part of the conversation. So as we look forward to how campaign financing would be conducted and improved, we see a partnership. If we criticize those who are helping parties to win elections, as we do, and making them look like, yes, some are extremely greedy, but where are the structures of state and the party that says, if you contribute, you register it, the government knows, they are even interested in where the money is coming from, and you understand clearly that it doesn't turn the party into your enterprise. Are we doing that work? This is something that must be on the table. Furthermore, if we look at what it is that regulatory bodies would have to do to ensure that the money you donated is known, what you earn, what is used for are all accounted for, does GRA have a place in looking at the financing of the parties in a positive way, not because they are committing any crime, but rather making sure that monies contributed for the cause of the nation are not privatized? They are accounted for and how they are used. This is what is happening in the democracies all over the world. We do not have those structures. So the challenge for me is, can we build these structures? Can we change our laws? That which shows that being in a party is serving a public cause. You may not be called a civil servant, but you are actually serving a bigger cause than being in a particular ministry. We have a number of recommendations in that regard. We think that the only entity from our understanding that must hold parties accountable for the expenditures and whatever, and which parties have also been reported not to be doing, is the EC. But post-election, the business is not elections. It is development. It is probity and accountability. And we do not have structures in place, or the education that should take place, or the institutions that should be there with staff to go around making sure that they account for what it is that they collected in the public interest. We do not have those. So institution building is going to be extremely important. And we think probably if we set up what we call probably an independent multi-party democracy commission that complements, EC does elections, post-election, what institution is there to see our parties doing the development, the nation building? Probably another institution should bring them together, engage them, but also be responsible for state financing of their activities. The state has responsibility to support parties develop to serve the nation. At the moment, it doesn't do that. And we think that this is an important thing we should do. Probably we could think about multi-party democracy fund, which business people and others contribute. And that is the fund that helps in also strengthening our parties as development agents. They are now election machinists to a large extent. That's the name given to them. But they can transform our nation in the next 30 years if we also see that state funding must go to parties. It is done in the Scandinavia. It is done in Europe. It's done in America. But it's rigidly controlled such that IRS, which is the equivalent of our GRA, are involved to know that the monies you get to educate your people, do research, analyze the policies, hold annual party conferences, come from the state. It should not be from independent pockets or that business abandoned. It's part of the governance process. If we can do this, we also think that we should strengthen the legal framework so that parties that seek to govern would also be seen, whilst an opposition, to be very law-abiding. And accountability is extremely important, that we cannot leave it in. So raising more money or being able to mobilize monies from Ghanaians, rich people, youth paying dues, party people paying dues, and in fact contribution from the state would give us a different kind of a party we'll call a democratic development party system, probably in the next 30 years. So it's not just for winning the election, it's for transforming the state and the society. On that note, I thank you.